We are going to continue what we started last week when I was here. If you were here last week, we're going to do a little quick series called I Won't Grow Up. And I talked to you a little bit about Peter Pan and how that was a part of my childhood and watching that movie, and still as a 37-year-old man wanting to try to figure out how to get a fast pass for that when we go to Disney, because that's always a long line. But we talked about a story of Jesus in Matthew pulling a child in and talking to the disciples about that. We're going to do the exact same story, but we're going to look at it in Mark, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we can take away as specific learning that will hopefully impact you, impact us as we move forward. But I want to start, last week I gave you the definition for adulting. So we're going to do a couple more of those. We talked about, I read you some tweets on adulting, but we're going to look at some memes this morning. So just a quick review. Adulting is like the really annoying stuff that as adults you have to do, but nobody wants to do, like get up and go to work and be on time and pay bills and stuff like that. So we're going to look through a couple of these adulting memes and see if any of them maybe connect with you or anything that you've felt growing up. You know, kids want to be adults, but adults want to be kids. So we'll look at a couple of these. This description, taking yourself for a walk. All right, what else we have? I know there's a few of them up here. Adulthood is like the vet. We're all the dogs that were excited for the car ride until we realized where we were going. Thought about running away more often as an adult than I did as a child. Not always a lot of places to go. This has happened to me, except I'm like burning one of the hot plate things there. Adulthood is like looking both ways before you cross the street and then getting hit by an airplane. So we'll go back today. People, you need to act like adult, and I'm like Peter Pan, just flying off, trying to go back and remember what it was like being a kid. So we're going to read together in Mark. Again, it's the same story, just Mark's version of it. So we're in Mark chapter 9, and it is verse 33, and it goes to 37. I was looking here in the Pew Bible. It doesn't have a delineation with another subtitle, but if you look up, we're on page 1012, 1012 if you're in the Pew Bible. If you look up the before verse 30, it's got the little title there, and it says Jesus predicts his death a second time, and so we'll kind of reference that in just a minute, but we're going to jump down to verse 33. They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, and this is Jesus, when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last, and the servant of all." He took a little child, whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." So I don't know if anybody else is like this, but when I'm reading stories in the Bible and accounts of things, I sometimes try to like envision myself in them or think about like fly on the wall thing. And so this is 100% not biblical. This is just what I think. I feel like they're sitting there and Jesus is like, "Hey, what were you guys talking about?" And they're all like cutting their eyes at each other like, I swear, Peter, if you open your mouth because he's the one that's most likely going to, spill the beans and talk about, it was probably John's fault because he brought it up or something like that, but they're all there like, I swear, if any of you say anything, we're going out back and we're going to handle this. But nobody says anything. Doesn't matter. Jesus, knows what they were talking about. But it's kind of interesting. He begins his very first line, sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, anyone who wants to be first. And again, this is Jay's version of what he thinks happens. But if you have been here before, you know that periodically Pastor Doug will ask a question or pose something, that is not something we're all jumping up and down to admit. Have you ever been hypocritical with someone, or have you ever judged someone who's not a follower of Christ by the rules that Christ gave us? And we're all like, yeah, I did that. But no one's jumping up and down, I'm a hypocrite. And he'll kind of, pause and be like, I know nobody in this church has ever done that, but let's just think about other people, at other churches. I feel like that's what Jesus is doing here. He's like, what were you guys talking about? Talking? I don't remember. I had a cough. You probably heard me coughing. And he's like, okay, so if anyone wants to be first. I'm not saying you guys aren't the ones that want to be first. It's not like you've been following me around for years and hearing me talk about love and serving other people, but you might run into somebody who wants to be first. So, tell them this, because clearly you guys are not the ones who want to be first. Just let them know, if you want to be first, you have to be servant of everyone. You have to put yourself last. You have to put everybody else before yourself. That's how you become first in my kingdom. And so we talked last week about 3 characteristics that we think, or that I think, you guys just nodded along and nobody argued, so I'll say that you agreed with me. 3 things that are characteristic of children that are significant for us as followers of Christ, and that is children show humility, dependence, and curiosity. And so we talked about, why we should have those things a little bit last week, and so I want to kind of turn it, and now this week talk about how do we have humility, how do we have dependence, and how do we have curiosity. So the question, how do we become more humble, is odd, because it sounds like you are trying to create and orchestrate this thing where you are going to somehow make yourself less and make other people more. And so if you're asking the question, how can I become more humble, that's not really, I think, the best way to go about it. And so I think back to myself, who has some issues here and there periodically with humility. And what I know is I feel that I am most humbled or most correctly aware of my smallness in the grand scheme of things when I am serving other people. And so I think that what I have discovered about myself is it is really significant for me to be a part of serving other people, because it's kind of like a check on my ego. If I haven't been serving people, if I haven't been a part of a community outreach or something like that, I am much more likely to be reflecting on how great I am and how wonderful I am and how everyone around me should be so lucky to be able to interact with me. Hopefully I don't get that far down the road. But, when I am serving, it's really difficult for me to think of myself as a grand human being when I'm on my knees picking up somebody else's trash. It's difficult for me to think how lucky people in my life are to be around me when I'm at Four Corners Park with a trowel picking up evidence that dogs are eating well in the neighborhood. When you are doing things that are putting other people before you, when you are doing things that are for the greater good, it is really easy for you to see how small and insignificant you are in the grand scheme of things. It's really easy to see that when you put other people before yourselves, you're doing a better job of reflecting the teachings of Jesus than you are when you're walking around crowing, thinking of how great you are and, what you're going to eat and how lucky it is, that animal was killed for you so that you could take care of your food. So whatever it is that you're doing, serving in a capacity that is an easy process for you, or serving in a way that's really like outside the box and you don't know that you've been in this area before, I would encourage you, I feel like, I would encourage you to make serving a part of your life, to make serving something that is significant to you, to make serving an opportunity for you to be reminded of how unimportant you are and how significant the people are around you, whether you know them or not. I think the second question, how do we become more dependent, is really easy for me because I have Emily and James, 8 and 5. They can both kind of swim, but if they are in the deep end in the pool and I'm on the outside looking at them, they look like this. They're on the side of the wall as tight as they can get, like they're scaling, the Empire State Building or something like that. But as soon as I go in to the pool, now they're jumping in the deep end, now they're doggy paddling around, now they're swimming back and forth, because they know if they lose it, if they look around and they can't quite get their breath or they're not going to be able to get to the side, I'm going to be able to step over and grab them by the arm or grab them by the waist or do whatever I need to do and pull them up and make sure that they're okay. Doesn't mean that they're not going to have taken water all down their nose and mouth and they're coughing and spitting in my face and doing all those lovely things that kids do when they think that they're going to drown for 0.7 seconds. But they know that when I'm there, everything's going to be taken care of. And so I think when we think about, as humans, how do we become more dependent on God, we find areas in our life that we are not in control of, and we try to do that a little more. We take an additional step in that direction. So if you are living your life in such a manner that you are in complete control of all the outcomes, you don't really have anyone that you need to be dependent on. But if you begin to take steps and move towards dependence on God, you're going to have to do some things and go into some areas in which you don't have complete control. So it could be things like having conversations with coworkers or with people in your family about Christ. A few weeks ago, we did like a 3 or 4 week series about, talking to people about Jesus. And I think that sometimes we're waiting for like this mythical moment, like where we're going to be at work and the clouds are going to part and the heavens are going to open and God's going to say, Jay, this is the time that I want you to talk to your friend about Jesus. And we're just like hanging on. God, when you show up, I'm going to be completely ready. And we're missing all these small, little, quick opportunities where we could just make a mention here or say a thing there and allow that to lay the groundwork and begin to move towards that conversation. It could be something like giving. Maybe you're not a part of giving, or maybe you're, giving less than what you feel like God is calling you to give because you want to make sure that there's this much money and you got to go out to Sonny's on the third Sunday and then you got to make sure that you're going here on this day and things like that. But you know that there's an opportunity for you to participate more in what's going on with outreach around you. So I think for me, the easiest way for me to kind of check myself on the dependency is to just spend a few days thinking, is what's happening right now completely in my control? And when I reflect back on this week, I was really in control with a ton of things. So I know that when I look at becoming more humble and knowing that serving is a big part of that, and becoming more dependent and knowing not being in control is a big part of that, when I look at this week, I didn't do a very good job. I was not very childlike this week. I was in control of almost everything that happened to me, and I didn't really do anything for anybody. Now, I got Emily and James, and, I've got Aaron, and so, yes, you're kind of doing stuff. But when we talk about, moving outside of your comfort zone, when we talk about serving people that are different from you and rightly putting yourself in perspective of being unimportant, this week wasn't a great week for me. So looking ahead gives me an opportunity to think through what's going on at work this week. What's going on around me this week where I have the opportunity to do a better job of serving somebody, a better job of taking a step towards dependency where I'm a part of something that I don't have complete control over, where I have to say, God, this might be a really weird situation, but I feel like, this is what you're calling me to do, and so this is what I'm going to do. Taking a step into the deep end and making sure that you know that God's always going to be there to guide you. The last question, how do I become more curious, I think actually solves itself. Because if you are putting people before you, if you are serving other people, you're going to get to meet and hear and talk to people that don't live like you do, that don't sound like you do, that believe different things than you do. And all of that should make you more curious. Because if you're going to be someone who shows love, if you're going to be someone who's a good friend, you find out more about what your friends like. You find out more about things that interest your friends. Because the more that you know, the better conversation that you can have, the better questions you can ask. Same thing with dependency. As you become more dependent, as you become more reliant on God, you become even more in awe that He uses us as a tool to impact the world. You become even more amazed that the love that He has is infinite. You become even more blown away that He has the ability somehow to interact with every single human being on the earth, and He's doing it in a unique way with each of those human beings on the earth. And so you become curious to find out more about God. You become curious to find out more about the people in your circle, the people, maybe that you work with or people that are in your family. Trying to find out what it is that you can do to better serve those individuals. Find out what you can do to better show love to those individuals. And so when I look at this, 4 verses, 5 verses here, there's probably not a perfect way for us to really get the magnitude of what Jesus did by bringing a child up. In our day and time, you see families that are like 100% the child runs the show. And they go from season to season or from event to event or whatever it is, everything is focused on the child or on the children. And this was like 180 degrees difference. Like, you might ask, where the kids are or anything like that would be like a ridiculous question because the kids don't matter. And so there was another thing that I read in one of the commentaries this week that it specifically says in Mark, so Jesus sitting down called the 12 to Himself. And that was a significant indication that he was about to teach. And so when you hear Jesus called rabbi or Jesus called teacher, like sitting down was like the call to order. Like you're about to get some information here that you need to pay attention to and that you need to try to implement. And so my thought, again, is that the disciples were coming in thinking they were going to get, some great teaching and they were going to learn something new and they're ready to soak it in. And he's like, bring me that kid. I'm like, what? The what? Oh, there's a kid in here. Why are you in here, kid? You don't matter. And Jesus says, bring me the kid. And he brings him in there and says, unless you become like this child, unless you become like this child, unless you completely change what you're thinking about, being number one, being the greatest in the kingdom, unless you completely change that, you're completely missing out on what I'm saying. And again, the subtitle there, when we looked in the scripture, right before this happened, Jesus had predicted his death a second time. So after predicting his death a second time, their next move was to argue about who was going to be the greatest. And so I think about, how exasperated Jesus must have been with the disciples, how frustrated he must, have been if it was me doing the same exact thing. But I think if we focus on being humble, if we focus on that aspect of humility, dependence, and curiosity falls into place. Because if you think you're the greatest, you're not going to need to depend on anybody else. You're going to think you have it all down. If you think you're the greatest, you're not worried about things that you don't know because you think that everything that you know is enough and that you're in complete control and that everything will be fine because you are amazing. So when we look at the teaching here of Jesus, the focus for me, my big takeaway is when I look in the mirror, am I looking at who I consider to be the most important person in the world? Or am I looking at someone who is blessed to be loved by God, who is honored to have Jesus sacrifice his life for me, and is willing to go out and share that love and share that grace? And I would challenge you to ask yourself the same question, to reflect back on this week, to see if maybe your week was like mine, and it was a lot of me and a lot of focused on what I wanted to do and what I was in control of, or was it a week where you gave yourself away, where you did for others? And regardless of what that answer was, I would encourage you to try to do a better job of it next week. Let's pray.